Hello and welcome to the Open Source Hangout where we discuss the development of open source software. This is episode 3 that's live streamed on July 30th, 2014, and this is live streamed every week at 9 p.m. Central Time on Wednesdays. I'm your host, Sean Massa, software engineer at Groupon. This week's co-host is Trek.
I'm back. They let me come back. I've escaped. I was in a horrible prison location in New York called LaGuardia last week. But it's nice to be back now and not waiting on a delayed flight.
That's awesome. We're glad to have you back, Trek.
And
we also have our panel of guests, and the first one's Dusty.
Hi, everyone. Yep, Dusty Burwell here again. I work at Groupon with Sean and Trek, and looking forward to chat.
And we have Mike.
I had to unmute my mic. Hi, I'm Mike Hall. I'm a core team member with the CoderWall project, coderwall.com, and I used to work with Sean.
Yeah. And we have Patrick.
Hey, I'm Patrick. I work at Assembly out of Atlanta. I also run the Ruby users group in Atlanta, too.
Awesome. And we have Stefan.
Hi, I'm Steph. I like open source.
Awesome, and those are the people that we have here this week. Let's move on to some news. Trek, you wanted to tell people about this open source conference.
Yeah, I wanted to plug a conference. I spoke here last year and might be speaking here again if I can figure out how to work it in my schedule. It's called All Things Open. Really fun conference, pretty gigantic. I'm usually a fan of like single track, shorter sessions, but this is a pretty big one. I think there's like 10 tracks and many talks, and it's October 22nd to 23rd this year in Raleigh, North Carolina. So if you're in the South or the East, great place to go. And I mention it this week because I think the early bird tickets are on sale right now until August 6th. So head over to allthingsopen.org and you can get more information about it. I had a really fun time last year, so highly encourage people to go.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. The first news item that we have there was a report a few days ago, almost a week ago, I guess now, where the Tails OS operating system, the Linux distribution that's really focused on security and anonymity, has a serious flaw. And this was reported by a company that gathers these types of flaws and sells them, but they've assured Tails that they don't want to sell this one. They just want to properly disclose it. I think the company's Exodus Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I thought that this was very strange. Not that this doesn't happen. This happens all the time. Sometimes they'll save these vulnerabilities for conferences and talk about them more broadly. But most people would agree that the proper way to deal with this is that you tell the project first privately, and you give them the details. I mean, if they're selling it, that's different, but they said they don't want to sell this one. And then that project has time to patch it before you announce anything about it. But what happened here, supposedly, is that they just tweeted that there's a serious flaw. And that was the first time that Tails OS devs had heard about it. And I feel that just knowing there's a flaw is a huge security risk, because if you're just trying to poke holes into something, you might just try for a while and give up because you didn't find anything. But if you know for sure something's there, you're going to try harder, you're going to find it, you're going to read into like the nuanced ways they actually mentioned there was a flaw and try and figure out where it is. Like, it gives you a lot more information than just nothing. So I don't really think that was like the best way to handle this. What do you think about it, Trek?
Definitely not the best way. I mean, most big projects, especially open source projects, will have like security mailing lists and responsible disclosure policies.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, I'm on the Ember JS core team, and we have this. And you know, for the most part, people play along very nicely. For the security of everyone, it's disappointing to see groups not playing along nicely. The frustrating thing is like that, you know, affects the security of not just the people using it, but people associated with people using it. You know, just overall, pretty much a bummer to do stuff like this.
Yeah, and it's on a really high-profile project, at least right now, because Edward Snowden endorsed it. Mm-hmm. And it feels like a media play. Like I wasn't even when I first heard about it, I just didn't even think there was actually a vulnerability. But they've released more information about it since, including like where the problem is. It's in a special IP hiding module, which again I think is also a problem because now hackers know where to look. Apparently, it's still unpatched. Like I don't think you should just like if it leaks, then sure, like yeah, you can tell people about it. But
Yeah.
if you're the leak, it just seems wrong. So the reason they said that they did this was because they wanted to let people know that there's no such thing as like perfect security, and you shouldn't put 100% confidence into anything. I know that we're biased, but I feel like a lot of people would know that. But maybe you found Tails OS because you're some average person who's not as in tune to this world, and so you went and grabbed Tails and thought it was going to protect you perfectly. So maybe there's some truth to that, but I don't think they handled it properly.
Yeah, probably not.
That's a fallacy. That, of course, as you mentioned before, but it's still a responsible disclosure scenario where just doing so instills confidence, regardless if there was a problem or not. So releasing the information in some confident way instills confidence in your community, and this is immensely important. And it's sad that they didn't go down that path.
Yeah. So the next item that a lot of people have been talking about recently is that TJ, of Node fame, Holowaychuk, seems to have sold Express to Strongloop, and that's a little eccentric, but it's definitely sold the domain name, and for some I didn't see any amount where, but I saw that he mentioned it was small, actually transferred the repository for Express.js over to Strongloop. And this is a little unsettling because, yes, TJ wrote it. He wrote most of the code, provided a lot of the direction, but he sort of moved farther away from it in recent time, and a group of maintainers have taken up like actual maintenance of the project. And it seems like they weren't notified that this was happening. They found out when everyone else found out, and it was really unclear what that meant for them specifically. And it just felt like sort of a poorly handled situation, but it also might not have been the best thing to happen at all. So it's just, yeah, it's not a great situation. So Trek, do you have some quick thoughts?
I think this is one of those things that we'll like see how it plays out. Definitely handled poorly. I know they Strongloop took over maintenance and of Node Inspector, the sort of nice debugging tool for Node that will put your code through Chrome, and that they sort of revived that project because it was languishing. So that seems like a good place to take over sponsorship. Although in that case they left it under the Node Inspector community name. They didn't like move it into Strongloop. There was an issue on the Express on GitHub on Express from one of the maintainers, like this kind of belongs in the Express.js org, which already exists. Hopefully they understand that like what they've done like obviously crosses no legal boundaries, but is sort of like tone deaf to the community they want to attract, and will punt that over to the Express.js community repo. But who knows how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and I'd like to open this up to everyone else as well. What do the rest of us think about this actually being quote unquote sold?
If I may, it sounds like, I'm not a Node developer, but as I look over into the community, it seems there's like I've seen a couple power grabs, or what seemed like power grabs, where there was some. I don't know. Is that something that's kind of normal in that community? It seems like there's some competition between commercial interests and people are doing open source, and then even like with the NPM, I think there was some disagreements about over who owned and managed the package manager versus the name. It just seems like sometimes there's more shenanigans going on in Node, it seems, than other communities.
Yeah, that's definitely happened in the past. Like that NPM thing was problematic. I think the core of whether or not this was okay, in my perspective, is how the maintainers of Express.js are reacting to it. And right now they appear to be reacting poorly to it. Not like they aren't doing they aren't reacting well, but their reactions are negative. And if this was something that was worked out between them and they felt confident in it, then sure, whatever, that's fine. But it seems like it's just disenfranchising the people who are most making Express.js happen.
Yeah. I mean, the real risk here is that the people who are actually doing the work of maintaining it currently will fork the project, and that doesn't help anyone. It definitely doesn't help Strongloop. It doesn't help the people using Express. It doesn't help the Node community in general, because Express is such a large library and a large part of doing web development on Node. Yeah, seems bad.
Yeah, the response from TJ made it sound like it was just a sponsorship, but I still don't really understand why they changed the repo ownership. The whole situation seems a little strange. But
well, previously, wasn't it under like TJ's personal GitHub account under Vision Media, or like under LearnBoost, his former company? I think it was under one of the two. It wasn't previously under Express.js. I mean, there are weird notions around ownership of something that's open source, obviously, because it's like there are people who start it and there are people who sort of usher it into life, but then they end up with a life of their own with maintainers, and often the original authors aren't the people working on it anymore, and like we just sort of float along on goodwill at this point, which is nice. But like, is this the grim future of open source development, where people start claiming ownership and selling out, tossing intellectual property around?
So I maintain a few projects that are under other companies that I don't work for as organization names, and it honestly doesn't bother me. But I think if a project grows to have add-ons and have an ecosystem around it, an organization just makes perfect sense for messaging and community building. That's kind of where I draw the line. If it's a library that doesn't really have too much of an ecosystem around it, I don't care where it lives. Where it was born is fine. It can stay there forever.
But Stefan, it sounds like you took over maintenance on something that was already under a community, under a commercial name, whereas this sounds like people got work pulled off from underneath them, and now it's without their consent, underneath some commercial.
The thing that caught me there was it seemed like at least one of the active maintainers was surprised. This was the first time he knew that this was going to happen, so that seems unfortunate. I suspect the individual wouldn't have been too upset if they would have been told up front. It seemed like they found basically one day they had no more commit to Express and it was somewhere else. And that just seems like a great way to make your contributors feel like they're not contributing of value, like their contributions are not of high value. So.
It is important to mention that the organization transfer, at least they claim that's why the permissions, the core commit permissions were lost. Like it was just part of that process. It wasn't intentional, and they have restored that since then. But yeah it is.
So
it is
the reason I brought up the one package that I maintain was even though I didn't start the project, I'm the only maintainer of it. If they moved it now, my feelings would be a little bit hurt that I've spent 2 years working on this project, and it'd be nice if you told the maintainer that, hey, it's moving before the rest of the world knew. That was my only.
Even in the posting from Strongloop, it says, well, if you were a contributor and you've lost your access, just send us an email or contact us and we'll add you back. That would kind of throw me off if I was like, I have to come back and ask permission to get back in to something I was just working on, and then because some administrative thing happened, now I have to ask permission to get back. It would feel a little bit like an insult. I don't know. But I'm soft like that.
I think you're absolutely right. Those little things matter a lot. Those, like, you acknowledge the person has done a lot of work, they've spent a lot of time on this, they have commitment. It's very important for you to sort of honor that and let them know ahead of time and make sure that these things don't happen. And if they do, that's all right, I guess. But
is anyone aware of any other high-profile projects that have moved, especially since I guess the kind of GitHub era has dawned on us, where we can easily transfer ownership between organizations and people. I mean, this seems to me, I just to reiterate something that Trex said, this is something that's still, it happened this morning. We're going to still have to see how this really plays out, but I think it might really be a learning experience for us as a community, both the Node community and open source in general, how this actually plays out.
I think the Socket.io stuff has moved around a bit. Everything else I've seen has kind of moved from a personal repository to an org of its own like ecosystem. I don't know of too many other things that have moved to what seems like less open and more to a corporate org.
So this actually, I mean, do you remember what happened when Apple bought the company that made Sprout Core? They left it under like the Sprout Core name on like
Facebook?
GitHub. No, Sprout Core. Well, before that, when Apple bought it.
Oh.
Right, like they left it under the Sprout Core name, but the project just went dead. Like people were issuing pull requests and doing commits for like 6 months, and then Apple came out all of a sudden and it was like, oh hey, we've also been working on this in secret, and all of your commits don't apply anymore. So sorry.
I think a future entire session could be devoted to like large enterprise open source interop.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure.
To itself. We should move on.
Yeah, it definitely brings up some interesting ideas of ownership and how we're going to deal with that. But yeah, let's move on to like actual open source funding models. So I want to frame this like I'm a developer. I really like open source. I want to find some way to, maybe not for my entire income, but for a non-trivial amount of income, I want it to come from money that I get from doing open source work. I'm trying to make that as vague as possible on purpose. So there are a lot of different ways that we can do this, and there are a lot of different models that people have tried and had varying degrees of success. So I thought it'd be cool if we just talked about what some of those models are and how some of the pros and cons, and if we have some personal experience with some of those, that's cool too, as well as some of the newer options that are being made available. So one of the easiest ones I think we can tackle first pretty quickly is just tips. Like on your GitHub README page, for example, you just have a little button that says, give me some money through PayPal, or here's my Bitcoin wallet. And that's, does anyone know if anyone's had like a lot of success with the tip model?
I've never seen anyone have a ton of success for it. I know I own a increasingly tiny amount of Bitcoin.
Increasingly tiny?
Well, as the dollar amount value of that goes down, the amount I have is fewer and fewer partial pennies. But no, I've never even seen a big project be successful on something like bounty source. I've definitely seen big bounties like in the multi-thousands, but that seems sort of few and far between. And very often they don't get claimed. I think, at least in that world, people like, to someone who's like putting up their own cash, $1,000 seems like a lot. And to someone who's devoting 500 hours into a incredibly difficult feature, $1,000 is like, it'd be nice, but like that's such a low hourly rate for what you're doing. I don't know that it's a great way to make any money that way.
So the NeoVim project seems to be a recent, fairly large bounty source. Is that the right one?
I think so. Yeah.
That Kickstarter for open source things. It seems to have sparked a lot of activity, and I think all the deliverables were met, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. I gave them money. I thought it was exciting. We should ask him, the dude that was receiving, what his thoughts are on this. That would be an awesome.
So I know there have been other people who've used Kickstarter. So Michael Ficara used Kickstarter for like the CoffeeScript Redux. Yehida Katz used it for his sort of like Ruby development environment stuff. Takedo, and those seem to like historically seem to languish. Like they do well, people get the money, and then it's like they take much longer to deliver on those. But maybe that's just the story for Kickstarter in general. I say that having received like maybe 1 of 20 Kickstarter objects.
JSKit was also another one.
Yeah.
RVM raised 51,000,
Yes.
50,000 towards RVM 2.0. And they got some big backers from Linode and DigitalOcean.
Mhm.
I backed them as well, $80 because it's worth it.
I did too, and I don't even use RVM. I just
Yeah.
I want I know when people do use Ruby, I really want that to exist for them. So it's like this is worth the amount of tech support I will not need to do in the future if I can just tell people
Absolutely.
do RVM.
But
So, and
it does feel like you have to be a pretty big project to make money.
I honestly think that in any of those situations, it's just been the ability for the person to justify more time, and it has not been a
Yes.
money making scheme.
Yeah.
Which for some people is totally fine. Some people love this as a hobby, and they would love to sort of not turn it into a commercial thing, but they want more time. The only time they have left is those hours where you need to generate revenue to like eat and live and stuff.
You could sleep less. Steph, you could sleep less.
Well,
That's true.
I tried to do a Kickstarter for the Utastic project, and it didn't do well. It failed miserably. I was only trying to raise $2,000, and which I actually did end up having one person basically say that I'm looking to pocket money, and like somehow that was like a big get rich. It was ludicrous. They basically hounded me on Reddit for even asking for money, and part of the whole ridiculousness was them basically saying that I'm going to be pocketing $400 because that was what they calculated the difference between the actual cost of the translations and transcription I wanted to do, and it was. So there's a dark side to that too. If you
I
don't,
guess
When
I
it
didn't.
comes to
open
I
open
guess I
source
didn't make my
entitled-
case well.
We call that open source entitlement.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's entitlement. Every time I've seen people ask for money for doing open source, that refrain does come out of the woodworks. Like, how dare you ask for compensation for this? Like, I hear it often enough that I often have to stop and be like, well, is it actually bad to ask for money to be doing open source? Considering like I do benefit a lot from open source that other people have maybe not been paid for.
Well, I was trying to be clear. This person just was kind of off the rocker a little bit because I did say any overage goes towards
Yeah.
more translations. So it was just though that the whole reaction was like this was some get rich scheme, and I was
That's really unfortunate.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I'm just saying, like, there's some people land and they don't make any money at all. Some people seem to do, get good funding, and others are accused of trying to swindle people out of their hard-earned money because they just asked for help.
Well,
So
obviously the value you provide is not as important as potato salad. So
Well, that's actually the whole thing that got it started. And their argument was, well, the potato salad is going to be a fun thing, and people like fun, and therefore they should give money to fun things. Whereas mine wasn't so fun, and I didn't do as good a job.
So there's another project that I think at least the outward it seems successful, and that is Sidekick, Mike Perham's Sidekick project.
Mhm.
And I think he's blogged about this a few times. That I think his sort of plan was, can I generate enough money to live by working really, really, really hard on open source and delivering some super good value. And for those who aren't familiar with what Sidekick is, it's a background worker system for Ruby projects, but the typical systems before were like single concurrency by processes, which gets very costly. And his strategy was to use a framework called Celluloid to accomplish the thing using threads. And this allowed lots of businesses to basically drop a 40 or 100 node cluster to 4 or 5 machines. So there's lots of financial incentive to support his project. And it seems, at least outwardly, that this is it's being successful for him.
So to be clear,
Didn't
he makes money on doing Sidekick Pro, right? Like Sidekick Core
Correct.
itself
Oh, yes.
is free and open source, and Sidekick Pro is additional functionality that you pay for. Also, if you need this sort of thing, like I get to use this at work. Like it's an incredibly small amount of money for the value you get out of the project.
Right.
Yeah, and that's another model that we can
And
talk about.
he wrote up, I'm looking for the article right now, but he wrote up a great article where he explained how he started originally trying to work through consulting. And that's also something that even Zed Shaw's talked about, how just doing open source in and of itself didn't necessarily translate into a stream of jobs or connections like he would thought there would be, even though he did stuff that was like game-changing stuff in his community. But Mike, he wrote up about how he started doing consulting, and then it wasn't until he packaged up this extra enhanced functionality, started selling licenses, that he started to make something like $100,000 a year. I'm going to find it. I'm going to link to it. But it was a very great article about how he came to be.
Yeah, I think in proportion to the value he's providing, he's not making much money, but I think it is good for his lifestyle. If at least that's the tone he gives off.
Yeah, how to make $100,000 in OSS by working hard. I'm putting that into chat.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's mentioned it yet either, but I think he recently left his salaried position to do this full time. So it's a pretty cool success story of it working out. Looks like he's actually expanding to new products too. So it sounds really awesome.
That's great.
It looks like Contributed Systems is this company. Yeah, contribsys.com.
One other topic this is very related. Some people don't want to be paid for their open source work. Some people do. Some people would love to do it all day, and other people would prefer to remain a hobby, and they don't want to mix their sort of ADD, zero obligation, open source contributions to a thing that has more responsibility. So that's another. If we want to talk about that, which someone else has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, some people do feel that way, and that's fine. I think I want to approach this from the perspective that we do want to make money from this. Like, it would be great if I could make money from this. And that open, I don't know if there's like an official term, I call it like the open core model. Like, you get something for free, completely open source. If you want this extra stuff, you can pay me for it. I've seen a lot more successes using that model. It seems to be something that's much more viable.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to not like the term making money from open source too, but it's really more about like making it sustainable. So if you think about who's really paying for your time spent on open source, maybe it's your job, or maybe you're spending time that you could have spent working on open source. So it makes sense that there would be some aspect of, there's money involved, so you can continue contributing to this project. So I don't know. It's interesting, the wording makes people mad sometimes.
Yeah, I guess actually in the last while, a large percentage of my work is actually working on open source for some of our corporate clients. I wouldn't say my entire salary comes from that, but a good chunk of it comes from specifically making improvements to Ember. Usually that's wrapped up in some other consulting type work, but we run into a performance problem or a bug. Client is not only happy, but so often they're incredibly excited that they're able to sponsor some open source work. So that's definitely not like a product. It's more like getting paid to work on some open source, which I think was part of the.
So Sean and I recently got into put into a similar position of we're on a new team, and part of our mandate is to support the technologies that we use that happen to be open, and that encompasses, if someone finds a bug, it's part of our workday to go track down and fix that bug in the open technology. Which is cool to be in that position. I would say that still represents a fraction of the amount of open source work I do, because it has to be a thing specifically tied to what my corporate overlords need, which does not always jive with where I would like to see my projects go. I try to make it connect as much as possible, but that's really tough.
Yeah, sometimes we're lucky and the planets align and everything is wonderful for a few hours.
Yeah, which is
I have to
awesome.
say the majority of my open source work is definitely in my free time, and I do like it that way. It is a hobby, and I would be scared to transition 100% into that.
Actually, I'm gonna use this as a chance to plug this this library, Fog, which is a very similar kind of thing to what you were describing, where they have it's an open source tool, but Rackspace sponsors people like Evan Light to work full time on the platform and supporting the Rackspace portion. You know, I can't speak for exactly what Evan works on, but from what I understand, he just supports the Rackspace version and maybe some other stuff a little bit. But they basically Rackspace has recognized that this tool is not just valuable for the community, but also a very good way to get people to easily use their platform. So there's a business interest there. I just wonder if that's something like the stuff you're working on, Trek and Sean. Is it that's not just that it's good publicity for the company to have you guys working on open source stuff, but is it also a interest in trying to make it easier for people to interact with Groupon at all? I'm not exactly sure all the stuff you're working on, so.
What's the question?
That was a terrible question. I'm basically asking is the stuff you're working on, is that also something that Groupon sees as a way to get developer or consumer acquisition? Like, is there a commercial incentive to for them to have you work on it other than just good publicity and community outreach?
There's a direct business value. Like, we're standardizing a lot of teams on a stack of open source tools, and improving those tools is going to come back and improve what we're working on internally. So
okay, so
there's both direct business value and that indirect community value.
So it sounds like a reinvestment strategy.
If I had to just pull a strategy and the reason out of my butt, I would say beyond just what Sean mentioned is also having that kind of public face, or kind of public face to at least developers, and showing people that, hey, we're cool, we do open source work and whatnot, increases our talent pool potentially. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I could imagine. Obviously, our target audience, as far as customers is concerned, they're not necessarily looking on our GitHub profile and seeing what kind of work we're doing. So,
well, I know with Groupon, a typical consumer wouldn't really care about the GitHub, but as far as I was thinking of, like, how Spree has a very good API, Stripe has good APIs. So by having those good APIs, it's more likely that I'm going to want to, as a developer, work with those tools. Therefore, put more money into those companies. And I guess that's what I was awkwardly fumbling towards. Is there any advantage for Groupon to have you working on, aside from publicity and goodwill, to have you working on these open source tools? And it sounds like not really. It's more about being able to standardize the tools inside of Groupon, and by working on these tools in the open, Groupon is able to leverage them better internally and make sure that they go in the direction that they want them to go.
To at least participate in that discussion, yeah.
Yeah.
We just have Zane just joined us, so if you want to introduce yourself real quick and you had some thoughts that you wanted to share. Hey, Zane, are you with us? I think you might be having connection issues, so we can keep going.
I think, if I remember correctly, the Nmap project, this could not be, maybe it's not accurate anymore, but I believe at one point in time was collecting on commercial licenses of their open software. So I believe, at least for some period of time, some security scanning tools would basically bundle Nmap, and they would pay for the same functionality. They would license this from them and wrap it up in a different UI and sell that as an appliance or something. So that it's Another example. Ooh, Zane is typing. Should we read what he's saying?
He
It's a
could
lag
type in
issue.
IRC as well.
So it seems like some larger open source projects that have corporate backing often do like support contracts. So I know like MySQL you can obviously just grab, but if you want support contracts, like there's a way to get official support from the real maintainers. Although like does that open you up to like weird issues of
Is that kind of like the Red Hat model a little bit?
a little bit, but like, does that open up to weird competition of like, you know, we're the official support for open source technology X, but then like some other company could come out and offer better support or.
So, Chuck, I think we just had this discussion at the last Ember face-to-face.
We did, and everyone's like, no one wants to do corporate support.
And that was part of it, but the other part was there's a difference between you have a core contributor who's offering support and their company is employing a good core contributor, and a company saying they are an official supporter of X. So there's a distinction there. That's likely important.
It seems kind of strange too, because the motivations to improve the open source product are kind of indirect conflict with making more money from support, right? If you have a really crappy database, then you can probably make a lot more money from support contracts. I don't know. It just seems. I don't know if that actually happens in the real world, but it always seemed weird to me.
I almost guarantee that happens in the real world.
You've secretly stumbled upon the monetization strategy for Ember.js. We've made it so complicated that one day you'll have to hire us all to write better apps.
Honestly, I think any project that has good momentum, the ceiling for what can be done is so high that this is never. I'm never worried that that's a problem. As soon as we unlock one block, we're just going to end up in a whole new level of craziness. So.
And I think that's basically like because of where the industry is right now. It's still such a gold rush. Like there is so much room for everybody to be in the space and still make money and do cool stuff and release projects. It seems like there's much less competition than people assume.
So interestingly, before my time, I guess, stuff reading back in time, it seems like stuff was slower, momentum was slower because of how much stuff was locked down. So, for example, there was a time where a TCP stack was a thing you had to license, and this seems like it's stifling innovation, whereas now there's a lot of things that are free, open, probably corporate sponsored, and it seems to be accelerating open source, accelerating software,
and I know that
and making people less afraid of like exactly the statement of, oh, if we make it too good, we will be able to sell support or something for it.
And I know
that fear is going away.
There are companies like Andreessen Horowitz who like they're investing in companies that don't necessarily need to turn a profit. I mean, they might, which would be super awesome, but I feel like they're investing in companies that like NPM or Meteor, GitHub, where it's like they may turn a profit, but like their function in the larger investment package that they're putting together is they make it easy for other companies to definitely turn a profit, which is super cool. Like people are getting funded to write basically like open source infrastructure stuff that may not otherwise get written.
And that could only really happen because some large investment firm like that can actually pool their investments among those large, smaller investments. So it seems like that's something that
I would love to see the terms of one of those investments.
Yeah.
What do you do in your board meetings? So I don't know. You haven't been closing enough PRs lately.
Right. Yeah. This is secretly why NPM encourages small modules, so they can talk about number of modules installed as a metric for how well.
This is why their client doesn't cache properly, and you have to constantly reinstall everything. I brought it. No, I hope it improves.
I'm
sure Laurie isn't
sure
here to defend.
I know Laurie should be here. Laurie should come on to defend himself. We're being jerks and talking about him behind his back.
No, it's okay.
But at the same time, like I would worry about a world where like I think NPM and systems like it are absolutely critical to businesses putting their business together. Like what would happen in a world where there was not enough momentum and not enough interest in putting money towards a project like NPM? Like would something as essential as a package manager just languish and die? And like the negative effect that would have on money-making businesses seems terrifying to me.
Well, to be fair, NPM became the glorious NPM that it is so far without that corporate backer.
True.
It is an interesting concept, though, Trek, do you have a resource, or is this just a theory that you've been sitting on for a while? Because this sounds fantastic.
Which one? I have so many theories. Is it my Battlestar Galactica theory?
This one about NPM and GitHub. Essentially, Andreessen Horowitz investing in these companies as essentially I guess, party booster.
I think they've gone out and publicly said this, have they not?
I don't know if they've actually publicly said this.
They did.
Maybe they have. To me, it's like the only reason I can think of a company like Meteor or NPM getting investment dollars. Like I don't see NPM ever becoming the sort of company where it's like they're gonna get a 200%, 300%, 1,000% return on whatever investment they gave directly from NPM. And so it's like it's the only way I can make sense of these investments.
But they could be associated with being the NPM company.
Absolutely, totally true.
When you write the blog post about this, you have to draw the parallel to like having a cleric in your D&D party.
You could actually do a whole show, I bet, on people who maintain package managers. I know a few of them. It seems like every platform, once it gets to a certain density, has to have some kind of package manager. And
it sounds less like a podcast and more like a support group.
Yeah. Sounds eerily similar to our first episode.
Yeah, we might want to wait before revisiting that. But I do want to talk about specific options too, like specific platforms and not just strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of them that I've actually not seen open source developers use, but I've seen other people use, like podcasters, is Patreon. And what I really like about this model is that it encourages people to give periodically, so give a smaller amount, but make it every month so that the person receiving it can have a more consistent income. And then you can use that, and I guess there's another one called Subbable that does something sort of similar. And you can use that money, that donation amount, to put them in a specific range for rewards. And that's a really nice way to get something back, some physical good that you can actually point to and associate your money with. But
I know.
also,
Is that tied to open source or just?
No,
it's not strictly open source. Like, yeah, you
I
can
know
use
a
it
few
for whatever,
people
but I
who
wouldn't
use Patreon. One is artists who tie. The interesting thing about Patreon is their model is kind of tied towards providing a good or providing a service of some kind, and having that be tied to the donation level. So, like for instance, an artist who like sends out a print like every 6 months or something to anybody who is donating more than $10 a month or something like that. Also, a few podcasts that I know of actually do this, where they have their free podcast that they've always done, and then do like a second episode a week or something along those lines, that then only the people who are subscribed through Patreon actually get that value.
It's kind of like the Railscast guy.
Yeah, I don't know about
like
that specific instance.
But I brought it up because I think that this could be used for maybe some of the larger open source organizations where you get stickers, or you get, like, it doesn't even have to be too much physical goodness, but I think encouraging that monthly contribution, smaller monthly contribution, like some of them will default to like $3 or something, and allowing that to spread a little bit more and be more consistent on the income side, and not just get, today I got a $100 tip and tomorrow I get a $2 tip.
I wonder if
I know at
GitHub
least
would
one
benefit
developer
from
who's
this.
doing this. I know of at least one developer who's using Patreon, and I'm not sure exactly what her model is as far as tying it to any kind of, like I said, with the artist who actually sends out a print or something like that. I'm not sure if it's tied to anything like that, or if it's just simply the subscription, send a few dollars every month type of thing. But it is actually a pretty decent stream of money. I wouldn't say that it's livable by any means, but definitely a nice small amount of money to come in every month.
I knew there were a few people on GitTip making like $300, $400 a week or something. That seemed like a pretty significant amount of money. I don't know. I'd like to see those models where you can actually pull in a more normal salary from just small contributions from a ton of people.
Mm-hmm.
It would be great. It'd be great if a lot more people were open to donating to these projects.
For context, GitTips model is their target is essentially sending or giving tips between members of the community for and the original target I think was for open source work. I think it expanded beyond that quite a bit, but it's actually kind of an interesting case study as far as companies go because they're trying to operate it wholly openly. So all of their discussion about how the company is supposed to be run and whatnot all happens in the open in GitHub issues.
Do they do a subscription thing as well, or is it's just one-time tips basically?
I think you can only do subscription if I thought that was correct. But...
Correct. To do weekly tips and stuff like that. So there's another one I wanted to bring up that I actually just discovered yesterday called BitHub, and this one is interesting because I can drop a link in the IRC, but it's interesting because it's supposed to combine Bitcoins and GitHub. That's where the name comes from. But it has like an automatic system where every pull request you get merged in sends 2% of the current Bitcoin bank, the current Bitcoin wallet for that project to you. So people can donate to the project and it adds to this bank, and then individuals can pull from that pool of Bitcoins by getting their pull requests merged. And it's a really naive model, like my pull request could be huge and yours could be small and we get the same amount, but I thought it was interesting. Like it's this automatic way of letting people give to an organization but disperse to individuals, as opposed to a lot of the other models are I give to quote unquote an organization, but some individual has to manage that and has to manage how they dispense it, and that may or may not be transparent. And it's an interesting model.
Patrick, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah. We actually do something similar on assembly, and it still has some of the similar nuances about it. So we give small tip amounts. I guess we can talk about assembly in a second, but we give like small tip amounts for each commit when your GitHub account is linked to your assembly account. So it works over like a long period of time. But yeah, if someone comes in and does like tons of really small typo fixes in like 30 commits, it will be a little bit disproportionate. But if you're working on a project for 3 months, usually it kind of evens out. So very interesting model.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a little quick thing about what we're doing with assembly is that it allows people to launch open source companies where they build their products in the open, and we have a license where well, I'm not going to try to say any lawyer stuff, but there's a modified license, and it's a new company that's just starting up. It's actually by the same guy who created CoderWall, and now he's doing this assembly. And there's a bunch of products where people can go on and they there's all different stuff there. I mean, there's a thing called Buckets.io, which is a API for built on Node for doing CMS stuff. But basically, you go in and you find something you can, like as a developer or contributor, you go in and you find some place that you can contribute, some need that they have, and then you go into that project and just find that need and satisfy it, and then you get a portion of the coins represent a portion of ownership, and once the product starts to become profitable, then you get a regular check every so often. I'm being intentionally vague because I'm not I don't feel entirely comfortable speaking on behalf of Assembly for exactly how everything works, but because I'm a contractor with them. But I'm a big fan of the platform. I think it's a great way for companies who have an idea or want to just get something out there and start building it, and get people that maybe have skill sets that aren't, like if you're a good strong backend developer and you can build up the Rails infrastructure, no problem, but you're not a designer, you can kind of launch your company on assembly and then go and try to court somebody who can fill in your weakness or your gap, and when they contribute, they get a portion of ownership in the company, and then you share without a lot of the trouble of starting up a company and finding a partner and then trying to negotiate all that silliness. Uh,
So it's kind of like investing with your ability and some of your time.
yes.
Yeah, you're essentially a partner in that venture. So, yeah, if we want to talk about it, if we want to switch topics and just talk about assembly, I will talk your ear off about it. But
Sure, I'd love to hear the elevator pitch, basically.
Yeah.
yeah, it works best when you kind of relate it to another project you're familiar with. So I think so. I don't know about Mike Graham's thoughts on assembly, but I think it would be a pretty cool experiment to take Sidekick, which is part of it's open source, part of it's a pro license. And if you made it open source and you just had license restrictions on it, anyone could contribute to that pro version. And then essentially, if you contributed a pull request or whatever, you would then be awarded we call them bounties in assembly. You'd be awarded that bounty, and you would own a certain percentage of the business. So it translates really well to other businesses too. For CoderWall, they're making money every month. You can go on there right now, submit a pull request for, I think there was like a big pull request to switch from Mongo to Postgres, and then you can suddenly be receiving revenue every month. And it's not just that you're getting paid for that specific task, you're actually earning ownership. So you're getting paid percentage of the business every month. So it's a little bit different from, it's not like Elance or anything like that where you're just paid per task.
Yeah. And they're really open. Like if it's interesting to see how they're open with the financials and seeing the month over month income and then what the overhead was and then what amount's being paid out and who has what percentage of the product for what they've done. It's still pretty new, but there's like I said, there's CoderWall on there, and Patrick works on a product called Helpful, which is a support tool.
We're actually launching tomorrow as like a 1.0 release. You can already use it, but we're going to do like a press release type thing tomorrow, which is kind of exciting.
I'm just skimming through the CoderWall bounties, and just to put it in proportion, I see migrate team data out of MongoDB into Postgres for, I believe it says 1,500 coins. Can you put into perspective what 1,500 coins means in this? For this particular project, what does this mean?
What?
Yeah, I'm looking at the
coin?
total coin amount.
Is it like a Doge coin? Is it a? I mean, like this is.
No, it's an internal. It's like a
like a micro share of the business. So we can't call it that. So I didn't say that.
Yeah.
So if I were to see
Terminology is hard.
1540 here, is there any way in my brain to translate that into?
Yeah, I'm sure if you were to go and look at the total number of app coins that we have, like on the bounties list, it shows that we have so many app coins available across so many bounties. And then it also changes per month depending on what our profit was that month. It changes each month depending on what our profit and our overhead was for that month. But as actually the percentage of ownership, I'd have to go and calculate it. I can see, like, if you go under ownership tab, there's a link of who has how many coins. And if I were to say 1,500 coins, that's in the ballpark of 3.5% ownership, just as a rough figure in the air. So yeah, completing that gets you approximately 3.5. And this is actually, again, where we're still new and we're still trying to work out all of this stuff, because that is a terrible bounty that we're working on as a team and trying to break it apart and turn it into much smaller tasks, because so it's acting almost like a meta. It's one of like our first bounties that we wanted to do, and it's acting as more like a placeholder in a conversation that's being kind of chipped away and pulled apart into smaller bounties that people are working on in different threads. So yeah, that one's I blush a little bit, over that one being at the top, but it's one of our biggest pain points. So it's got to stay up there. But yeah,
Okay, but it's value to you guys, right? So it's worth giving a little bit of ownership away in um, exchange for getting this done, basically. So in theory,
yes,
Steph does this, gets 3% ownership, and then if in fact CoderWall does well, there's a recurring revenue source for him. So rather than the immediate gratification of X for Y, it's more like I believe in this company. I want to help them out, and in return, it's not just geek cred I get, but I get that. In addition to that, if the company does well, I get a little bit of financial kickback as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can actually sort of do the math too for, I mean, there's financial statements, so CoderWall has an annuity towards Matt, but the rest of the profits, I think it's about $5,000, are shared among the community right now. So, and we are handing out checks, so you could kind of do, off a napkin, back of the napkin type calculation to be like, oh, well, if I own 50% of the, of the product, I'll make $2,500 at the end of the month. And that's not just this month. It'd be like every month until your equity gets diluted by other people doing work. So
do people typically make like a pool of ownership that's specifically for these coins? What do I call them?
App coins. We call them app coins.
App coins. Okay.
Like if you go underneath the money, you see that there's a fixed annuity that goes towards the creator of the product. And most products that get launched directly on Assembly don't have this annuity. This is only because it was a pre-existing product that had many years of active development. So the deal is that a certain percentage off the top goes right to the creator of the platform, and then there's percentages that go towards expenses. And like one of the things, it's hard to see because we don't have July represented, but we knocked almost $1,500 off of the expenses through contributions, particularly this guy Soros, who is also a contributor to Sidekick, and he's amazing. I love you, Soros. And
it seems like an interesting thing for like hacker spaces or maker spaces.
Yeah. And if we increase profit, that just goes into the that amount for the annuity is fixed. Everything above that, if we start to make $100,000 a month, that's going to be distributed to the coin holders. It's I should say there's a percentage. I'm not exactly sure. They do represent a percentage that goes directly to Assembly, and that's represented in there. But how that's calculated, I'm not sure. But it's small in comparison to the percentage that actually can be paid out.
Yeah, you mentioned it'd be cool for hacker spaces. It's an interesting model because it could work for a lot of different businesses. I think the ones that we're kind of attracting right now, and the people that are really like, oh, that could work for me, are the ones where they have a product, it's making money, but it's kind of, the growth is kind of topped out, or it's not going to turn into like $1 billion company. And they just want to, slowly kind of hand it over to other people while it's still, the product is still successful. And it really seems to work for that. There's a lot of startups who are like, oh, we failed, we're going to shut down, but if they could just move it to Assembly, it could at least be like sustaining and people could be making money by doing small contributions. So I'd really like to see that kind of start to happen, but it's still a slow process.
So the interesting thing I want to bring up about Assembly, the app coins I think are really interesting, but something that I want to definitely mention is that it's not like a funding model by itself. It's just a distribution model, right? Like the app you're actually building still needs to make money in some way, and that's where we might pull in some of the other models on that side. But as far as distributing that money to the contributors, that's where Assembly comes in, right?
Yeah, and we have some other projects we're working on too to make that more secure, like leveraging cryptocurrencies and stuff too, which would be really interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of these conversations happen in the open. We have chats that are available, and a lot of this stuff is documented. Obviously not every single conversation we have is open just because of we're on a Hangout or a Skype call or whatever. But they're really working hard to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, we actually have an assembly project on assembly, so you can like contribute to discussions. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can't earn coins because that would just be crazy, but we just have karma instead. So.
Yeah, but like even right now, the whole bounty system is under discussion, and that's all. We have bounties on bounty. And then people who are contributors are coming in and commenting. Like I'm sure Zane is just freaking out right now, wishing he could be on the call. But he's a contributor to CoderWall, and yeah, it's just seeing people who come in and contribute, getting to have their voice, in the conversation of how the company's future is going to be, which ultimately can have impact on how they're going to be compensated for their contributions. It's really cool. It's really neat.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting approach. I would like to wrap us up, so let's go down the line and each person could just give some final thoughts on open source funding models. So let's start with Dusty.
I think it's really interesting the number of options that exist out there today. Just thinking about where we came from with, I don't know, going way back with like shareware and things like that, where I guess technically that wasn't open source, but it was a way for a developer to make money on their side projects. And pay, like we said, mentioned PayPal, donate links and things like that, all the way to GitTip and Patreon and GitHub. GitHub is, I think, going to be very interesting as a way for people to both provide funding to open source projects and for people to get their portion of the money. It's definitely an interesting time we live in as far as that's concerned. I doubt that any of my little piddly GitHub projects will ever earn a cent, but who knows? Maybe someday.
Mike?
Yeah, if you've ever used a pro tip or found any value in CoderWall, even if you come in and complain about the site as a bounty, I'd appreciate that. So even complaints are helpful.
Sure. And Patrick?
Yeah, one thing I didn't get to talk about too much was just the whole idea of like an open source business. So building something out in the open and kind of allowing anyone to stop by and present feedback or contribute small changes has been amazingly awesome. Like I kind of didn't think it would be that cool at first, but it's been really cool. So if you want to join us, check us out at assembly.com/helpful. That's the open source product I work on. But yeah, there's also all the other models are really sweet too. It's just cool to see, just see that these are actually, some of these models are actually working, and that people are making sustainable open source products with them. So.
Yeah, and Steph?
I would love to see more innovation enabled by having more products open. There's a lot of cool tech that lives behind some encryption, some server, some firewall that just the world doesn't get the benefit from, other developers don't get the benefit from, and it's really a shame. Often there's a conflict between can we make money and can we be open. I would love to see if we can do both more, and the more information we can share, the better. So.
Yeah, and Trek?
I think we're still in the infancy of this, but hopefully someone can nail it.
I only write artisanal, handcrafted, bespoke open source. So I'm looking for my Medici family to sponsor me in my artistry. But until then, I'll keep doing a day job, I think.
Awesome. All right, so that's it for this episode. I want to thank Trek and all of our other awesome guests for joining us this week, and all the viewers who are watching right now. And this has been episode 3 of the Open Source Hangout. You can watch us every week at 9 p.m. Central Time on Wednesdays. You can always keep up with the show at opensourcehangout.com. And definitely send us feedback on what you liked and what you didn't so we can improve the show. And we'll see you all next week.